So hi everyone, my name is Tom Littrell. I work for ETC's Outreach and Training Program, and welcome to 50 Shades of R80. We're talking today about how ETC got from where we started to where we are right now with LED lighting fixtures. We're talking today about stage lighting. If you want to make a big blob of magenta light on a white wall, there are a lot of great ways to do that. And a lot of people are making good products that do that. But we talk more specifically about stage lighting, theater lighting. I'm an actor and I have any of 10 million different skin tones, and I'm wearing a costume that some costume designer has worked hours picking fabrics and dyeing fabrics and layering fabrics to make a beautiful costume. And then I'm standing on a piece of stage scenery that scenic artists have worked more hours painting, base coating, glazing, spattering, doing all the painting techniques that they use to make nice, subtly colored stage scenery. And then a lighting person has to light all that. And you don't light all that stuff with red, green, and blue. You light it with subtle tints and tones. You light it with pinks and blues and lavenders and straws, slightly different tones to bring out all those colors. And our job at ETC has always been to build the lighting products to do that. And now that we get into the era of LED lights, that's where we're at right now, is building those lighting products using LED light engines to make this work. Just so you know a little bit about me, I dropped out of college many decades ago. I was in a technical theater program, and I went immediately on the road with rock and roll shows. And so I started out in theater lighting, went off and did concert and touring lighting. I like to point out that sometime between the summer and the fall of 1976, I shaved, and my mother started talking to me again, so that was like a big moment for me. But I spent all those years in concert touring, and then I came back to work for ETC, or I came to work for ETC, and I got back into my roots, back into theater lighting. So I've got a background in both stage lighting, theatrical lighting, and concert and event lighting. So that's my background. This little presentation today is in 3 parts. The first part, we talk about the array. And when I say the array, I mean in all of these LED fixtures, there's a printed circuit card and somebody has soldered a whole bunch of LEDs to it. Why did we pick which LEDs that we picked? Which color? How many of which color? Why does all that matter? The second part is about additive color. We have all those different color LEDs. We put them on that card. Now we have to add them together to make the color that we want. And for a lot of lighting people, this starts to get scary because a lot of the things that you've taken for granted for so long, you can't take for granted anymore, because additive color and LED lighting change the rules a little bit. So there are new things that you have to learn that you may not have had to use before. And then the final part of this, I'm going to talk just a little bit about control. We give you these great new lights, we give you all this additive color, now we have to give you console tools that let you use it well, that let you use it quickly, that let you use all this new technology in a way that's expedient and practical to actually get a show lit as part of your day-to-day work. To start out, we're going to have a little bit of science for you here. Now, for some of you, this may be over your head, and for other people, you don't care, you know more about this stuff than I do. But it's a known fact that right now we're being bombarded by electromagnetic waves of all shapes and sizes, gamma rays, X-rays, infrared, radio waves, all that stuff is flying through the air. In the middle of all those electromagnetic waves is that tiny little sliver of wavelengths between roughly 400 and roughly 700 nanometers that is the visible spectrum of light. And amongst all the waves flying through the air, those are the ones that our eyes can see. Those are the ones that our retinas can perceive. Biology. I bet you didn't expect to hear anything about biology at a lighting thing, but we've all had some sort of high school biology, high school physics. You've heard this stuff. You know that there are rods and cones in your eyes. You know that the rods are not sensitive to color, but they're very sensitive to brightness. You know that the cones require a lot of brightness, but they're very, very sensitive to color. When you get up in the morning in a dark room, you can see well enough not to bump into furniture. And then you go outside where it's a lot brighter and you realize you've put on one black sock and one blue sock. When you were in the dark room, the rods were working, making sure you could make out shapes and forms. When you got outside, the cones took over, and that's when you knew that that deep dark blue sock on one foot was different than that black sock on the other foot. Now, again, this has always been the case, and I'm a lighting person and I don't care. But the minute you have to start thinking about which colors to put inside these lights, and the engineering folks have to decide how we're going to build these lights, all of a sudden somebody has to start thinking about this biology stuff that we've taken for granted for a long time. Another little bit of scientific information is the photopic curve. Many years ago, there was a lot of experimentation done, and the main result of that was to find out that if all the spectral energy out of all the colors in the spectrum is equal, our eyes perceive the colors of the spectrum in the middle brighter than they perceive the colors on either end of the spectrum. So all those colors are on a meter of equal brightness. Our eyes will perceive the greens and the yellows in the middle brighter than they perceive the colors on either end of the spectrum. If you send your kid out on a bicycle or you work on the highway road crew, you're wearing an orange vest or a green vest. You're not wearing a blue vest or a red vest because those colors just don't naturally pop as much to your eyes. Daylight, sunlight, is the perfect source of light for our purposes. Beautiful, full spectrum light all the way across the spectrum, all the colors wonderfully represented. If you actually have two different paint chips or two different fabric samples or two different material samples and you want to see exactly how they differ in color, walk them outside into the sunlight. And the sunlight will show you exactly what the real color of those objects are. And if I take daylight and I mathematically weight it to the photopic curve using mathematics that I can't explain and don't understand, so don't ask me, it fills the spectrum perfectly. And again, our eyes love daylight. For our purposes, it's extremely accurate when you're looking at color. Tungsten-Halogen, the light bulb that we've been using for all these years, is also a wonderful source of color. It's got a beautiful full spectrum. Everything is very even, but it happens to be a little brighter in the warm end of the spectrum than it is on the cooler end of the spectrum. And if I use that same mathematic process that I can't explain and weight it mathematically to the photopic curve, I can see I've got plenty of red, I've got plenty of spectrum. There's just a little less blue and a little more red. And that's why tungsten light is a little warmer, a little redder, if you will, than daylight. A little more science here, a little more biology. In the last few years, not only do we know that there are rods and cones, we know that there are 3 different types of cones. Now, it's not fair to say there are red ones, green ones, and blue ones. They're not that specific. They all react across the spectrum, but each one has an area where it's a little bit stronger. And the great thing about that, it means that this is one of the things that explains why our eyes are so sensitive to color, why our eyes can perceive tiny, tiny little differences in different colors. Now again, as long as I had a tungsten lamp and a piece of plastic color filter, I didn't care. This has always been the case. But the minute we start having to deal with LEDs and additive color, all of a sudden all this stuff starts to make a difference, and we kind of need to understand it partly. So why do I care? Why does this matter to me, a lighting guy? When LEDs first came out, they were almost always 3 color, red, green, and blue. The 3 primary colors of light used to mix any color that you could get out of those 3 colors. If I have an amber LED, it's a very narrow spike of amber. Just the nature of LEDs is that they are generally a very narrow spike of amber in one part of the spectrum. And if I have an amber LED, it's doing very specific things to my eyes. The cones are reacting, the long ones are highly stimulated, the medium ones a little bit, the lower ones not quite so much at all. If I have a red, green, and blue LED, an RGB LED, the way I make amber is to mix red and green. And it may look kind of like the same amber, but it's not quite the same, and my eyes aren't reacting quite the same. So now not only do we have amber, we have an amber made by 2 different ways, and I have to understand that if I'm using LEDs as a stage lighting tool, if I'm using LEDs to light skin tones and costumes and scenery. And finally, if you've had a high school physics class or you've had a lower level lighting class, you've seen some version of this drawing. The 3 primary colors of light, red, green, and blue, where they overlap, you get your secondaries, and where they all overlap in the middle, you get white light. And like I said, initially, this was the way LED lighting fixtures were made. We have red, green, and blue LEDs. We put a bunch of them in a fixture, and we can get every color we need But unfortunately, we found out in the theater world, we didn't get every color we need, and we needed another way to do it. Initial RGB lights, red, green, and blue. Like I said, you've got plenty of red, green, and blue. In the early days especially, the green ones weren't quite so bright. And if I did that same mathematic stuff and weighted those to the photopic curve, you can see I've got plenty of blue, I've got plenty of red, I've got plenty of green, but there's a whole lot of spectral content that I don't have. In that simple RGB fixture, I'm not getting a full spectrum. And the final thing to note here is that red LEDs, as wonderful as they are, and as bright red as they are, lack that last little bit of deepest red. Now, tungsten has that deep red. Daylight, the sunlight has that deep red. And our retinas, our eyes, can perceive that deep red, but actual red LEDs don't have that last little bit of deepest, darkest red. And we're going to show why that makes a little bit of a difference here in a second. When ETC got into LEDs, we were shown this new approach. If you're going to make good color and make good subtle colors, you can't do it with just RGB. You need to have a lot more LEDs than that and a lot more spectral content to make this stuff work, to make good theater lighting. If I take those 7 colors and turn them all on, it's not as pretty and as smooth as daylight or tungsten, but I do have a better chance at making good color. I do have color all the way across the spectrum, except for that last little bit of deep red. Again, let's look at an actual tungsten-halogen light bulb, and if my goal is to make a nice warm white light with an LED fixture that duplicates that, with an LED fixture, I don't have a chance. I can adjust the red up and down, the green up and down, I can do everything I can do, but I do not get a good result making a nice warm white light. If I have a 7-color fixture, I'm a lot closer, and I won't tell you that they make exactly the same kind of light. But you actually have a spectral content all the way across the spectrum, and it gives you a way to make all these different colors in a way that actually looks good, not only on a white piece of fabric or a white wall, but on delicately colored fabrics and any of 10 million different skin tones on actors standing on a stage. Now, this crude little drawing, and don't laugh because I did that on my own iPad, shows one of the things that really makes a big change for lighting folks. Warm white light is something we take for granted. You take any tungsten-powered lighting fixture and you turn it on at full and you don't put a color filter in front of it, that's warm white light. We start out with that naturally and we don't have to think about it. If I take a multiple color LED fixture and I take every color up to full, chances are I get a dirty pink that nobody ever uses. I actually have to mix warm white light. I have to create warm white the same way I have to create a pink or a lavender or a blue. And if you're not a lighting person, that doesn't sound like a big deal, but if you are a lighting person, that is kind of scary to think that your baseline for all color, warm white, is not a natural thing anymore. It's something else that we have to create out of these 7-color fixtures. So it's just another way that if you're a lighting person, sometimes you're scared to death by all this new technology. And then the final part of this first session here is this lime green LED. The original 7 colors did a great job. They weren't perfect, but they did a really nice job of filling in the spectrum. And then a few years, the emitter manufacturers came out with this lime green LED. Now, I'm a lighting person. Lime green is not a color that I would leap out and immediately select to make my warm whites and my pinks and my lavenders a good color. But it's in the middle of the spectrum and it really helps out, and I'm going to show you that in real life here in a second. So now, we've seen all this scientific stuff, as crude as it is, and now we're going to look at some of these cues on the actual piece of fabric here. So we've started out talking about these colors. Let's look at the 7 colors. Now, generally when people demo this stuff, you point the light at a white wall in some office or some conference room and let's look at all these great colors, but we've chosen not to do that. We've picked this interesting piece of fabric that has a lot of different colors, and it makes it far more obvious how much effect the color has coming out of the light on the color that's in the cloth. So we start out with red, that wonderful bright LED red, minus, remember, that last little bit of deep red. There's amber, that relatively narrow spike of amber in amber LEDs. There's green. I always like to mention the fact that these LEDs are not made for the entertainment lighting world. None of these giant emitter manufacturer companies think in terms of what makes theater lighting people happy. These emitters are made for other purposes, and we just do the best job we can using what's available to make a better product. Obviously, red, yellow, and green are in every traffic light in the world. Here's cyan, a blue-green color. Why do cyan emitters exist? Well, if you fly into an airport at night and look out the window of the airplane, you know that certain taxiways and runways have to be marked with blue-green lights. So they make these cyan emitters by the millions. For that purposes, in the marine world, in the aviation world, they're required to mark certain pathways, so that's why they get built. And we get to use it as well because, again, it helps fill in that gap between blue and green. Here's blue. They make blue emitters by the billions because every product you buy now has a tiny little blue marker light on it of some kind. The next color is this deep indigo. Again, we've gone from red across the spectrum to indigo. Who used this? Why did this emitter get built? Well, it got used initially in the dental world, teeth whitening and adhesive hardening. These were 6 of the original 7 colors, and here's the new guy. Here's that lime green. Now, I'm a lighting person, some engineering type, looks at me and says, this lime green is going to do a better job of lighting skin tones. And I do that, and I think I never want to look at that on a stage ever, because on human skin, it's a particularly dreadful color. But it actually makes a huge difference. If you think in terms of all the graphs that we've already looked at, if you think in terms of where they're the most jagged and the least complete, it's in the middle of the spectrum, and that lime green, it's a broad spectrum, bright, highly efficient LED, and it does a wonderful job helping us fill in those colors and get that last little bit of goodness out of these 7-color LED fixtures. So let's see this in action. If I have an RGB fixture, red, green, and blue, the way they were originally made, I want to make amber, and I start out with red. The only way that I can add, that I can create amber out of that with an RGB fixture is to add green. Now on a white wall that looks like amber, but on something with color in it, it looks garish. The reds pop, the greens pop, all the other colors get kind of muddy, and oh, by the way, that color looks particularly dreadful on human skin because it doesn't have all that spectral content between the red and the amber. On a white surface, it's amber, but on something with color in it, it doesn't do a good job at all. With the 7-color fixture, let's do the same thing. Let's start out with red. First thing I'm going to do is add some of the amber to that, and it's going to get lighter. And now we're going to add some lime green to that. Now that lime green that looks so garish by itself, all of a sudden is an incredible tool, and I have a way of making a range of colors on that warm end of the spectrum. I can go from red to orange to amber to yellow without having to go to full-on green and using green to make those colors. So I've got something that's a lot more valuable to me as a stage lighting tool because of that lime green emitter. Let's do another one of these exercises. Let's go to the other end of the spectrum. I start out with blue. If I have an RGB fixture, red, green, and blue only, if I want to modify the blue and kind of lighten it or make any kind of modifications, again, my only option is to start creeping in a little bit of our old pal green. And guess what? The green, as we've already discovered, our eyes are very sensitive to green. It overdrives almost immediately. And if you've tried this with an RGB fixture, you'll know that you do not get a nice full range of lighter blues moving into the greens. It goes immediately from blue to blue-green, and there aren't a lot of usable colors there. With the 7-color fixture, we start out with blue. Okay, I'm a lighting person, I'm not content there. I'm going to add some indigo to that. So we're going to make it a deeper, richer, prettier blue. But I want that to be a little bit lighter. I can add some cyan and even a little bit of that lime green. Now I have a way to make light blues. I have a way to go from deeper, darker blues into lighter and lighter blues, again, without having to resort to full-on green. So I've got a way to make these colors in a way that actually looks good on human beings, on costumes, on scenery, on real-life events. We talked a lot about mixing color. Let's talk a little bit now about warm white. If I take a red, green, and blue fixture and I mix red, green, and blue LEDs, I get a white. But it's not a good white. It's difficult to tell what it's doing on that piece of fabric, but what does that look like on a human being? Well, it looks kind of unnaturally pink. And I can work as hard as I can, and it will always be a little bit too pink or a little bit too green or a little bit too blue. I'm not going to get a good result. I'm not going to get a nice warm white that looks natural the same way a tungsten light looks natural on human skin. Okay, on my right is real tungsten light. That's a Tungsten-Halogen light bulb in a source 4. It's a 575 watt, 3050 Kelvin. It's on at full. And that's real tungsten light. When I hit this button the next time, I'm going to add the other 4 colors to the stripe on my left here. So again, this is why the 7 color thing, this is why we adopted it. This works and works well. Now, I cannot look you in the eye and tell you that these two things are exactly the same, because they're not. They're not. The spectrographs don't look exactly the same, but they are both very usable warm white light. So the 7 colors, especially with the lime green, gives us a way to give the lighting designer that warm white that they need to actually start out with as a baseline level to light the stage. Just for fun, this is, we'll do that again, except this is real tungsten. This is, again, an actual tungsten halogen bulb, 3050 Kelvin at full. And this is a nice warm white LED version of that. And again, I won't tell you that they're exactly the same, because they're not, but they're both very usable. They give you a way to get that light on stage that doesn't look artificial, that doesn't have that artificial pinkish, greenish, bluish LED look. And that's because of the 7 colors, and especially with the lime green added to that 7 color mix. So that kind of wraps up the first part of this thing, talking about the array. We picked these 7 colors, we picked different numbers of each one because we know what our eyes need and how many of each that we need. We're going to talk a little bit now about the next part of this, which is additive color. When you talk about color mixing, and you talk about it with scientists, with people that actually understand the science behind it, you'll start hearing the word Metamer or Metamerism. Now, I'm a lighting person. I didn't take a lot of physics in college. That's why I became a lighting person, so I could avoid all that stuff. So I want to learn what does Metamer mean, and so I go to respected scientific journals like Wikipedia, and I look that up, and I find pages and pages of words that I have no desire to read or understand. So in my case, specifically, I ask people that know more about it than I do, explain this Metamer, this Metamerism to me. I want to know what this means, and I don't want to have to read all that. So the simple answer I got was Metamer means color recipe. We're talking about additive color. We've got these 7 colors on this array in this light. The concept of Metamerism is, how do I mix these together to get the color that I want? And what does this really mean, and why do I have to understand this if I'm a lighting designer? Well, here's one of the neat things about the whole concept of Metamers. If I've got 2 colors, I can mix any color I want in a line between those 2. X amount of red and X amount of blue gets me to some point along that line. Now, there's only one potential recipe for each point along that line, but I can get any color I want. If I add that 3rd color, then I can get any color I want in the space formed by those. But again, there's only one potential recipe for those colors. Some red, some green, some blue gets me to some point inside that triangle. The minute I add that 4th color, all of a sudden the rules change a little bit. I've got a 4th color, in this case an amber. I want to make a nice warm white, or I want to get to that point in the color chart. I can do it that way. I can do it that way. I can do it that way. And oh, by the way, the minute you have 7 colors instead of 4, then the potential different recipes for getting to any part of that color chart, it's endless. And again, I'm a lighting person. Why do I care? I don't care what recipe you give me. Just give me the pink that I want or the lavender that I want, because I've got to get my job done and get going. But you really need to understand this, because the concept of metamerism means that when you're sitting back at the console, not all things are created equal. The world we're used to is this. I've got a fixture and a gel, I've got a lit object, my eye responds. I haven't had to understand any of that stuff. It just works the way it's always worked. In the new way of doing things with additive color, I have a fixture that not only will it make different colors, it'll make the same color different ways. It'll make a pink or a lavender or a straw color using different recipes. And I'm thinking, I don't care which one you use, just give me the color that I want so I can get my job done. But again, it's not that easy, and we're going to see why. So, metamerism, metamers. We're looking at this nice, bright, screaming pink. But the trick is we're not looking at one cue, we're looking at two cues. We're looking at two cues cross-fading at 1.5 seconds each. We're looking at two different recipes for that color pink. Now, on the white surface, I don't care, they both look fine. I'm happy with either one of those. If you look really, really closely, you might see some difference, but there's really not a difference there, practically speaking. On something with color, there's a lot more difference. And if you look at the reds, you'll see that those two color pinks on a white surface didn't matter. On something with a lot of strong color in it, the two different recipes mean a lot. Let's look at those same two cues with no timing. Let's look at those same two cues bouncing back and forth. So I'm a lighting designer. I say I don't care, but I do care. One of those may work perfectly for me. The other one is dull and drab, and I don't want to use that at all. So that's why the whole notion of metamers is important to understand when you're talking about additive color for stage lighting. And oh, by the way, on a human being, these are the same two colors. On human skin, one of these I may like a lot and may be perfect for me, and the other one may be, again, dull and drab, or I may want the dull and drab one and not want the brighter pink one. So both of these two different cues, these two different recipes for that same color pink have a huge difference when you're actually talking about color mixing and additive color. Let's do this one more time. Okay, here we go. Again, this kind of bluey, greeny, moonlight blue. You may have already guessed you're not looking at one cue, you're looking at two cues, slowly cross-fading one from the other. Two different recipes for that same color blue. On white, not a big difference. Again, on something with color, there's a pretty big difference. And if you look at the reds, you can see the reds coming and going as those two different recipes go to work there. What about on human beings? What about on human skin? Well, those two, like I said, those two blue-greens look pretty good on a white surface, and they look like they're the same, but if you look at human skin under those same two cues, you'll see that one is drab and greenish, and the other one goes warmer. And I may want one, I may want the other, but I need to know which one I want. So the concept of metamerism or metamers is highly important to understand when you're actually talking about additive color mixing. Well, first, if you're a lighting designer, this scares you to death. Not only do I have to know I want pink, I have to tell you what recipe. I don't want to think about that. This is scary stuff. On the other hand, it gives you a level of control at the console that you've never had before. Let's say, just for fun, you're doing Romeo and Juliet, and the Montagues and the Capulets hate each other, and everybody's at war, and the two young lovers are standing on stage, and they meet. And I can make those two human beings go warmer. I can just with the push of a button, without changing gel, I can make those two colors go from a dull and drab version of that color to a warmer, richer version of that color. So this is a really neat tool. On the one hand, it's scary because it changes a lot of the rules that we're used to. But on the other hand, it's really amazing that we have that kind of color control sitting at the console. One last little thing here. I talked a little bit about R80. This is a piece of R80 gel. Remember, R80 is a nice medium dark blue with a lot of red in it. So what you're looking at there is a tungsten-halogen light bulb with a piece of R80 gel in front of it. Rosco 80 filter, a nice warm dark blue with a lot of red in it. On my left is an LED fixture making a Metamer of that same color. Remember, R80 is known as a warm color. It's got red in it. I've got red LEDs turned on in my LED fixture to pop that red. So they look slightly different, but we do have two versions of R80. I've got one more little trick here. I'm going to take a black polo shirt, a black cotton shirt, and I hang my black shirt in front of my deep blue light, and I get exactly what I would expect. A black shirt hanging in a blue light. I move my black shirt over to this, and I get a totally different result. These two colors that even on the brightly colored fabric don't look different at all of a sudden there's a giant difference. Now what we're looking at there is that last little bit of deep red. In the tungsten halogen source, there is that last little bit of deep dark red, and something is happening in that shirt, in the dyes, in the cotton, in that fabric, and that shirt is picking it up. The LED version did a great job of making that color, but it lacked that last little bit of color of deep dark red, and that made a big difference. I may want one, I may want the other. The point I always make at this point in this presentation is that there's not a one-size-fits-all answer to the transition that we're going through now for stage lighting. If someone says LEDs are perfect, they do everything that tungsten will do, and you should throw your tungsten out, they're not giving you correct information. But I can also look you in the eye and say that LEDs have reached a professional level that you can light a show with an entire LED rig. But there may be some things that you'll miss. There may be some little aspect of tungsten halogen that you're going to miss. So there's not a one-size-fits-all answer for this transition. Every building, every lighting person's situation is different. Your building and your timeline and your budget is different than your building and your timeline and your budget. And everybody's at a different point here. And one of the things that I think ETC does really well is that we don't have a one-size-fits-all answer. We've got different ways for you to make this stuff work in your theater. If you've got an existing theater, we have answers. If you've got a smaller space, we have answers. If you're building a brand new building and starting from scratch, we have other answers. So we have ways to give you what you need right now and allow you to future-proof your new lighting system for the technology as it comes along in the future. So that's the neat part about, I think, about what we do, is the fact that we try to understand all these different aspects of LED lighting and what stage lighting designers try to do for a living and how we can make this work for them. Oh, and the last little thing here is, the LEDs look really good and they make a nice blue, and oh, by the way, they weren't even at full. So this is where the LEDs really are amazing. I was able to get out of my 160 watt LED fixture, I can get a lot more blue light than I can out of the 575 watt tungsten halogen fixture with the blue gel. So we've talked about the array, we've talked about additive color, but I'm a lighting designer. I have to sit at a tech table in the back of a theater and make this stuff work. And we would all love to sit in a light lab for hours and hours and play with little ditzy color things and mix and match and do what we want to do. But in the real world, we don't have that kind of time. You're sitting there trying to write light cues, and there's a director tapping their foot saying, why is this stuff taking so long? And you've got to work quickly. So as it is our job to build good theater lighting instruments, it's our job to build also good theater lighting control for that. And that's what we're going to talk about in the final part of the presentation here. The first thing we can do is we can talk about color spaces. On a macro level, we can do this all day long. We can work our way around the color space, more saturated around the outside, going to less saturated, closer to white on the inside. And Again, this is arbitrary. If you want to work in a circular color space, you can. If you want to work in the CIE chart color space, you can do that too. These are all the same. In typical ETC fashion, we give you way too many different ways of doing it, and we confuse you and we confuse ourselves, but that's okay because we all have fun doing it. But we give you all these different options if you want to work in a color space. The third color space we're looking at here is especially interested for experienced lighting designers that work with moving lights. Moving lights often use a color mixing system that uses cyan, magenta, and yellow color filters. These color filters combine to make the different colors, and we can manipulate those using this space and add and subtract the cyan one and the magenta one. And best of all, if all your fixtures are patched and profiled correctly, then your LED fixtures track your moving lights as closely as possible given the fact that they have different color mixing systems. So different color spaces, different ways to manipulate color that way. If you're a lighting person, you understand gel and gel numbers. The Roscoe book, the Lee book, the GAM book, the Apollo book, all these different manufacturers and their different numbering schemes. And if you're a lighting person, this is the language you speak. Roscoe 47 is a pink. Here we go. Roscoe 51 is an almost white with a little bit of lavender. 74 is a blue. So we can do this all day long and we can go pick those colors. Now, what about Metamers? You've only given me one Metamer here. What if I want to, there are different ways of making these colors. What can I do? Well, let's go up here, let's say to Roscoe 33. I'm going to go click this little button up here and I'm going to go from brightest to spectral. That changed from brightest color to spectral color. I'm going to go over and click 33 again, and I'm going to get a better spectral match. I'm going to get something that's more accurate compared to actual R33 gel in a tungsten light. The problem is I lost a lot of intensity. That was just what was necessary to make those two colors match one to the other. We've given you a way to get the brightest Metamer or the most spectrally perfect Metamer in these colors. So we've given you a way to do that. And then there's a hybrid for those of you that aren't happy with either one and want the one in the middle. Here's another tool. I like this tool. This is what happens when you sit software people behind a lighting designer and a programmer, and they listen to how they talk to each other. And you hear a lighting designer say, give me Roscoe 33 again. Give me that nice kind of really light color. I like that color, but I want it more red. So I can sit over here and tap and I can start adding red, and you can see that we're getting more red in the light and we're getting more red. I like that, but there's a little too much green. So I can go over here and I can tap, 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 and I can start pulling green out of that. So this is another tool. This is another way that I don't have to think about this stuff. I can just go to these tools and make this work. I can quickly make those decisions. It looks a little too red, take out red. Need a little more green? Add a little green. Now my favorite one is this guy right here. This is the one that appeals to me as a lighting designer. This says I can start out with, again, with my gel colors, the colors that I've used forever. We'll go to Roscoe 33 again, and if you're thinking, I hope that's interactive, it certainly is. I can grab this red and I can take this red out, and it's doing what it needs to do. It's adding and subtracting the red. And it's easy for me to reach in and grab a color and make that work. And here's another neat thing about that, to again add the concept of metamerism to this thing. I can click this little button here that says hold color point, and if I start subtracting red, it's going to adjust the other colors so that it'll hold the color point, but trying to build a version of that color that's using less and less and less red. So again, these are tools. These are different ways that I can manipulate color and ways that I can take all the tools that are in that array and all the notions that we've learned here about additive color mixing and make this work as a lighting designer actually trying to do this stuff for a living. So I've got an actress, she's standing on stage, and I've made her skin tone look absolutely perfect. She looks fantastic. And I go in and she's wearing a green dress. I want to see, how much green can I sneak in there and make that green dress pop without ruining her skin tones? This gives me a tool that lets me do that. So that's the great thing that we're doing on that end of it. This is a way to take all this LED lighting stuff and give you the tools to work with it on the user interface end. The final thing here now is color crossfades. One of the biggest problems with LED fixtures and one of the biggest complaints, let's say I've got a white background and I want to do a sunset kind of thing, and I want to crossfade from a blue to an amber. The old-fashioned way, I would crossfade from a light with a blue gel to another light with an amber gel. I do that on a computer and I get this. Now to the computer that makes perfect sense. I'm in one saturated color and I work my way around the color space to another saturated color. But to the human eye that looked awful. Nobody wanted to see magenta in a color crossfade between blue and amber, because that's not what you see when you crossfade from one color to the other using different sources. So what we did was we talked to software people and we locked them in a room and beat them with sticks and said, make it not do that. Give us a way to more closely duplicate the organic color crossfade between a blue color and an amber color and all points in between. And they did that, and it took a lot of work, and they had to measure this one on at full, that one at out, this one at 99, that one at 1, this one at 98, that one at 2. All the work it takes to decide what that really looks like when those lights color crossfade. But I get a color crossfade that I can use. And I can get a color crossfade that goes from blue to amber without going around the outside of the color space. And that gives me a much more organic way of changing color. So again, using what we know about stage lighting and LED fixtures to get a better result. And then the other thing we did is that we can go in and modify that. I can delay the incoming color, I can delay the outgoing color. If it's looking a little too bright and a little too white in the middle, I can take that middle of the color crossfade, make it brighter, make it dimmer. Let's run that again. Okay, let's make it a little brighter in the middle of the crossfade. Let's run it again. And I can do this quickly because the software folks have given us these tools. So that's the third part of this thing. That's where we're at. We've got additive color. We've got the array that's in the fixtures, the additive color that comes out of them, and now we've given you good tools to use that. So this is where we're at ETC, using LEDs as proper stage lighting fixtures. This is the world that we live in, and we're talking to people that do lighting for a living, and all the rules are changing. So if you're a specifier, if you're one of the many consultants that we work with, if you're our reps that are working on putting together new theaters and new high schools with theaters in them and new churches with big, really complexly lit worship spaces, all the rules are changing. It used to be really easy. I put in plug strips, I put a bunch of dimmers in a room, I run a bunch of wires, and I'm done. Now I've got to have some lights require dimming, some lights require constant power, some moving lights need high voltage power, most LED fixtures need 120 volts. I've got to take care of all that stuff, and oh, by the way, everything up there has to have data. So LEDs and other new technology mean that when you're putting new buildings together and designing new spaces for the theaters, you have to understand this stuff. If you're a lighting designer, this changes all the rules, especially if you're a working lighting designer. You go into one building one week that has all tungsten-halogen, you do things the way you've always done it. You take out gel colors and gel your lights up and do what you're used to doing. The next week you may go into another space which was built day before yesterday and has all LED fixtures. Well, you need to know how to do that. But your reality will probably be somewhere between those two. One building has mostly tungsten-halogen and 24 or 30 RGB fixtures. You need to know what those fixtures can and can't do to do a good job. You may be lucky enough to go into a building with a wonderful hybrid lighting system. Tungsten-halogen fixtures, ETC 7 color LED fixtures. You need to know how to use that stuff together, what each one does and how to use each one to best effect. So if you're a lighting designer, all those rules are changing out from under you. If you're an educator and you're not teaching your kids about this stuff, you're doing them a giant disservice. Because this is the world that they're going to be getting out into. They're going to be moving into this LED world, this hybrid world, some tungsten-halogen fixtures, some LED fixtures. And finally, If you're the technical director or the lighting supervisor and you're thinking, all this new technology scares me and it's changing way too quickly, so I'm going to wait a few months until this all settles down. I wish I had words of comfort for you, but I don't, because this is not going to settle down. We're in the middle of a decades-long change in the way stage lighting is done. So it behooves you to learn about this stuff and jump in and find out what works for you in your space. So thanks a lot for coming, and thanks for listening to the 50 Shades of R80 presentation, and thank you guys very much. Thanks a lot.